Welcome to today's webinar, everybody. We're excited to get rocking and rolling. You've got Gabe Larson here. Just as we allow a few other people to join the webinar, we're going to play a short clip, then introduce our topic and get into the meat of the conversation.
Hi, my name is Stephen Lang, and we're going to take a look at what my day looks like as an SDR at Vandelay Industries. Last Friday, my manager, Katrina Sanford, kicked off a week-long SMB Blitz campaign. Our goals? Every day she wants each of us to get 89 dials, 12 connected calls, and 3 appointments set. A bit of a stretch, but I'm going to show you how the InsideSales.com product platform accelerates my work by making my day more visible, productive, and effective. It starts with NeuroView, which tells me which leads I'm most likely to contact and close. Then I can use the Powerdialer to most efficiently communicate with those leads. Vision helps me track my engagement with those leads by monitoring their email and web engagement. And finally, Power Standings helps our sales team motivate each other and track our own goals. When these products all work side by side, I call more, engage more, track more, and more importantly, close more. Let's get started. The first thing I do is head to Salesforce to get things set up for Katrina's SMB Blitz campaign. I need a new voicemail, one that's tailored to the SMB Blitz and recorded in my own voice. That way, I don't have to repeat myself every time I get an answering machine. Instead, I just hit leave voicemail and the system leaves my pre-recorded message. I do the same thing with email. Set up a pre-made SMB Blitz email, tailored from templates created by my manager. Now I'm ready to hit the phone and start dialing. In the background, NeuroView is prioritizing all my leads so I get the best ones based on likelihood to contact them this morning and based on their likelihood to set an appointment with me. On my browser, I see these likelihoods as a neural score given to each lead. My first one has a neural score of 95, which means this is a hot lead. I call, she answers, we set an appointment. Not a bad way to start the day. I log the call in Powerdialer, which saves the lead in Salesforce, and I'm ready to make the next call. I click Neural Next to get my next prioritized lead. That lead doesn't answer, but that's okay. Remember that voicemail and email I made this morning? I just click Leave Voicemail to leave that pre-recorded message and Send Email to send my pre-made email. Easy. I keep this going through the morning. Rinse and repeat. Close to lunchtime, my coworker Henry sends me a throwdown challenge. There on the bottom left is my Power Standings app. Normally it shows my standings in the office and my key metrics, but Henry's throwdown challenge has taken it over. He thinks he can set more appointments than me. Throwdown accepted. Right after that, I get an email from Katrina. She used Salesforce reporting to analyze the hour-by-hour results of our last campaign. It says that the 12 p.m. hour was the most successful time to contact leads. I eat a quick lunch.
I had to interrupt the movie. I got to get going here. I'm too excited to jump into the conversation. Let me know if you are too. Give me a thumbs up or thumbs down there on the screen. Here's some house cleaning items before we get going. You're going to see a Q&A box there at the bottom. If you can, go ahead and type your name and where you're from. I want to make sure I know who's online with us today. Also, throw any question you can. We're talking cadence. It's an important topic. We got 50% of the people saying they're giving me the thumbs up and ready to go. There will be some downloadable documents at the end. I got to make a little bit of a plug. I'm running a InsideSales.com Sales Acceleration podcast. That's called the Sales Acceleration Show on iTunes. Please subscribe or go there. Great content, great information. So you'll see that also in the downloadable materials. I'm Gabe Larson. I'm now the director of InsideSales.com Labs. We've got some cool projects we're baking up. I've also run the strategy team here and done some other neat stuff in my career. Most importantly, been on the road the last 3 years, consulting companies on how to build sales teams, really diving in deep into the concept of cadence. That's what I want to go into today. So let's go ahead and jump in. Perfect. We got Ashley, we got Scott from FPOV, Letitia UPS, Spence coming from Dell. Fantastic. Let's rock and roll. So first, let's do a quick poll question. Let's talk cadence. How many total touches do you include in your cadence strategy? We're going to get into what best practice is and how to do it. We're going to go deep into detail, so I don't hope I leave you. We're not talking fluff here. I want to get into the real conversation real people, real stories. How many touches do you include in your overall cadence strategy? Are you on the bottom rung, 0 to 2? You on the top of that rung, 10 plus? I'll give you just a few seconds there to answer that. Looks like we got a handful of people. Good. Good, let's keep going. Results, looks like, wow, so we got a number of people up in that 7 to 10, and even a decent number in the 10 plus. Boy, that is surprising, you guys. That is surprising because most of our data, that's fantastic news. Most of our data is saying this. When it comes to two key concepts here, just phone calls and emails, that's not all about cadence. We're going to get into a more robust cadence than that, but most people are in the 1 to 2 phone calls and really just 1 email. Stat out there by our friends saying 70% of follow-up just has one email. What is a cadence? Let's define it real quickly. A lot of different definitions out there. And again, please use that Q&A box. I've got a team here. We're all watching it. I'll be watching it myself, and we'll handle some of that at the end. But cadence is a systematized plan of a series of interactions that uses different communication methods to increase the likelihood of contact with the prospect. That's the name of the game, you guys. It's getting in contact with a prospect. How do you do that? Ideally, it's systematized. Also, it's a series, and it's different methods. So let's go into that. We did a research study on communication methods, and this is why I build cadence strategies really around these 4 or 5 pillars. We ran a communication study. We asked people and said, what are you responding to? What are you using in work, outside of work, in prospecting, etc.? And this is the overwhelming results. Notice email dominates it. Landline is dropping. That's something that's coming out in our communication study that'll be released here shortly. Mobile phone still in play. Voicemail, I want to talk about that one. If I have to hear one more person say, I don't think people use voicemail, I'm going to get sick. And then social always coming on strong, more at the beginning of a cadence rather than at the end, but certainly being used heavily in a sales prospecting motion. So when I talk about cadences, this is the reason I talk about email, phone, voicemail, and social, because we've got good data to say that people are actively using those concepts. Looks like we've got a couple Q&A. Does your cadence statistics, Rick, vary by vertical, market, size of deal, or other factors? Great call. The 2 that I mentioned, the 1.3, 1.5 phone calls, that's just a semblance of 100,000 phone calls across everything. Absolutely. If you're playing in B2C, B2B, we'll talk about these kind of different markets, you're going to have to think about a completely different cadence. And you're kind of stealing my thunder in just a minute, but there is not a one-size-fits-all cadence. It's just not possible. Good. Next. So let's dive into this. A successful cadence is going to probably include, again, these 4 types of methods. A lot of people go passive to active. Now, you can't stay passive. I got too many reps who are they're just emailing. And my friend Trish Bertuzzi, I just read her book, Sales Development Playbook, and in it she talks about if you just email and do social, you're a pen pal. You got to get to active communication, and I'm a big fan of mixing and matching all of them together. Now, Rick just stole my thunder, but I will not, I repeat, I will not get on this phone call and tell you that there's a magic number, that it's exactly 3 phone calls and exactly 3 social, LinkedIn mail. It's just not true, you guys. Your market, your personas, your roles are going to reflect that. I've gotten some tried and true principles through war-tested experiences that I want to share with you, but you've got to figure out how it works within your own business. And here is one of the key principles, and that is roles. What types of roles do you have in your specific organization? Now, Karen, I'm going to jump to your question quickly here. Were these cadence stats a response to a question or actual tracking of attempts? These were actual tracking of attempts. I know that's a very fair question. A lot of times it's just response survey like we did in our poll, but the two that I gave you were actually one from 100,000 phone calls, one from 500,000 emails. Good. Now, back to these roles. This is one principle you can use to start to build your cadence. And it comes around personas. Now, in the inside sales market, you guys, it is insane. You've got SDRs and ADMs and VGRs and CAEs. I don't know what you call them, but there's a lot of different roles. I've tried to roll that up into 3 super personas or super roles. That's sales development, account executive, and customer success. And then with these kind of super roles, I've then thrown in the concept of attributes. So for example, you've got a sales development rep, and then you've got 2 key attributes, a transactional sales development rep or a relational sales development rep. And then below that, you've got an inbound or an outbound. Now you can see how I've mimicked that across account executive and customer success. But these roles with these attributes allow me to build some tried and true principles around cadence. So for example, if I'm a sales development rep who's transactional, now what is transactional? You know, you're high dialing, your short sales cycle, you're targeting the SMB market, your value, your ACV or your opportunity size is typically going to be fairly low, under 50,000. So that's more of a transactional rep. In that type of persona, that type of role, you're going to be a little bit more aggressive. You're going to see more touches. Whereas in that relational role, something that's maybe 180 days plus sales cycle, you know, 500,000, $1 million ACV, you're going to have quite a bit different and extenuated, a longer cadence strategy. And then account executive and customer success kind of fold into that. But being able to successfully identify these roles in your organization is going to allow you to follow some of my best practices and build a cadence strategy that mimics who you are. And that's an important point in where we want to go. Okay, good. Next, let's keep moving on. I'm looking at Q&As as we go here. Is there a way I connect with other attendees on this webinar? Sorry, there's not, Jason. I apologize. But go ahead and ask me questions. I'll make sure we get them out to the rest of the group. Let's first go into phone calls. I want to hit some of these pillars and then bring it together in a cadence. How many phone calls do you include? So it sounds like overall touches, most of the group was in the 7, 6+ range. How many of those are phone calls? Hit me with that real quick, and while I give you 30 seconds, I'm going to look at a couple questions. Yes, love that question by Scott. Yeah, I'm going to get that one perfect. Okay, so Scott Brady, FPOV, does Cadence include drip programs? Scott, it does not. We're talking about specific sales activities here. If you debated and you were really partnering with marketing, I may be open to it, but typically no. This is a sales-driven cadence that an individual is running. Marketing is doing their own thing, trying to promote events, etc. Okay, let's see what the actual results are. Survey says 7 to 9. Okay, most of you are in the 3 to 6. That makes sense. 3 to 6 phone calls. A couple of you down at the bottom, 0 to 2. Good. Let's jump into it. So, Karen, I think you mentioned where was some of that data coming from around phone calls. This is the one I'm primarily going to do, but there's been a lot of other studies. I was just looking at one from our friends at Insight Squared. This is based on 100,000 phone calls. What does it tell us about cold calling cadences? Here's a couple things. I've just bulleted them for you guys. I don't want to bore you with all the details. Best days are Wednesday and Thursday. Now, I'm hearing some rumors that other people are finding differences in this study, but for us, That's holding true. We're seeing a 49% difference in contact rates between Thursday versus Tuesday. Best times to call, again, I've been hearing a couple rumors that some other people are finding something different. I've been running this in our labs. We're still seeing early morning and late afternoon. In fact, we're seeing about 164% difference in qualification rates from 4 to 5 p.m. versus 1 to 2 in general over the week. Is using a local area code more advantageous than an out-of-state area code? Absolutely. Optimal number of phone calls. Now, we're going to talk and go a little bit deeper into this. We shoot for 6 to 10, and we do that over a 2-week or 30-day period. So put that in your quiver, because cadences, we typically base it off a 2-week or 30-day period. And if you get up to 6 to 10 phone calls, contact rates we're seeing jump up to an increase in 70%. Now, spacing between phone calls typically is going to be 1 to 3 days or 3 to 10 days, depending on the roles. Again, I'm going to be referencing those roles or personas, so keep that in your back pocket. Guys, this is the detail that I think people need in order to build cadence. I don't want to just throw out, hey, maybe do 3 to 6 phone calls. Let's get into optimal times, 14 days or 30 days. Optimal spacing between activities, 1 to 3 or 3 to 10. Now let's go one step deeper in phone calls. So you take your persona and then figure out how many phone calls you want to do. So for example, I've said here, SDR relational, let's do 6. SDR transactional inbound, again, that's someone who's really transactional, mostly focusing on inbound calls. 10, AE relational, focusing on new business. 4, AE transactional, focusing on new. 6 phone calls. So I've gotten that part of my cadence number of phone calls in place. Good. Now, how do we do that with the InsideSales.com system? We're going to be talking about how you build cadences with our system. Absolutely possible, absolutely powerful. Powerdialer, great opportunity to be able to click to dial anywhere, save time, automate the calling prospect. If you don't know about it, check it out. Okay, next, let's talk about voicemails. Here's a poll question, and I'm going to jump over to the Q&A. Do you use voicemails? How many do you include in your cadence? Oh, too many questions on the Q&A. You guys fill that out. I'm going to see if I can answer some of these. Do we include ghost calls by Will? Oh, I just lost you. There you are. Ghost calls. Most people call ghost calls phone calls without voice messages. What I'm breaking those apart. Phone calls in of themselves and voicemails in of themselves, break it up. I know there's some differentiation in terms there in the industry, but I'm going to stick to that. Harish, please elaborate 6 versus 10. Thank you. Oh, I can't believe I forgot that. So we typically on outbound prospecting go 6 phone calls. So if I'm an SDR who's going outbound, and outbound again referring to purchasing lists or going a little more cold, we typically focus on a 6-call cadence. If you're dealing with marketing generated leads, Harris, that's when you get up to the 10 phone calls. Daisy, where can we get that awesome, I included awesome, Daisy, I hope you don't mind, Harvard review study about lead calling? Oh, Mike, can we get that link and send it to her? Yeah. Good, great. We'll get that to you, Daisy. Let's go in. I better go back to the poll question. Tons of Q&A. We'll have to get to it in a minute. Poll questions, about the same. Okay, so most of people, about the same number of phone calls as they are voice messages, which I'm not a huge fan of, but we'll talk about it in a minute. So much talk. Like I said, it's almost making me sick sometimes dealing with reps saying, hey, look, I never look at my voicemail. Voicemails are dead. You had Coca-Cola. I don't know if you heard this. It's been almost a year now, actually. They kind of eliminated voicemail. Only 6% of employees opted to keep it. Is it dead? So I got 2 things. One is, you're going to see this in just a minute. The average person gets 121 emails, average office worker. per day. That sounds a little much for me, but it is a lot. Voicemail is becoming less used. Think about yourself for a minute. How many voicemails do you get? Now, I'll be the first one to admit an email and a voicemail don't always end in a marriage. Don't always end in someone calling you back and saying, hey, we want to buy from you. But it's a good touch. And people are starting to do it less, which is a great differentiating factor for you. Remember from our communication study, voicemail isn't dead. There is a place for it, and you've got to do it. Don't just be, as Trish Bertuzzi said, pen pals and be doing email and social. Find a way to find the balance, and we'll talk about optimal cadences here in just a moment. So as you think about voicemails, let's dive into some of the nitty-gritty. We're going to go deep here. Sales Buzz, love what they've done over there. We did a webinar with them not too long ago. I loved what he said about objectives of voicemails. Number one, get a call back or advance the call. If you're talking about follow-up voicemails, you want to advance the sales. Be persistent without being a pest. What are some of the top voicemail best practices? I've listed these. You'll have reference to this deck, but let me just go through a couple of these. So don't be afraid to ask what you want. Keeping it short. We're finding 10 seconds. You've got about 10 seconds before people are deciding if they want to stay on or not. 18 to 30 seconds is kind of the maximum voice message. Shorter the better. I read a recent study that said 9 to 14 seconds. We're still holding true right between that 18 to 30, but my goodness, anything beyond that, I don't care what study you look at, about 30 to 40 seconds, you're in a problem area. So I'd keep it short, definitely. Using automation, being able to record a perfectly worded voicemail and then being able to drop that to somebody versus the ums and the ahs that you typically hear. I literally have listened to hundreds of voicemails. It's a doozy. It can be pretty bad. So I love to use automation and write it down. I like when reps stand up. I like when they kind of go for the cliffhanger approach, just providing enough information to get you grabbed and then they jump off. I'm not a believer in lying. I'm not a believer in spoofing. Hey, John, I had something really important to talk to you, and then you hang up and act like the call got disconnected. It's funny, and I always do find it funny, but it's not appropriate. So I'd recommend in my sessions, we just don't go there. You've got to start different. I'm not a believer, certainly mix and match it, you guys, but I'm not a believer that you want to be starting and saying, hey, this is Gabe with InsideSales.com, my phone number. I like to jump right in, wow, your blog post, and then go into kind of the rest of your value prop or whatever kind of theme you're going to use. Referencing other communications, super powerful. What are some keys then as we dive into these? I'm going to skip that one and go straight here. Most utilized strategies to help you get into kind of the real meat of it. Now, I'm going to go through just a couple examples, but these are the ones that I actually have marked down as ways we can start to build a valuable voicemail strategy. You got the referral play, the research play, the context, the value prop, the pain, the case study, humor, funny, cliffhanger. So I've noted these, 10 to 15 strategies, and then I build these into my cadence strategy as such. So I'll show you just a couple quick examples. So here's maybe a case study example. Hi, John. Recently helped relevant case study and wanted to see if we could do the same for you. Let's connect. Then you could say I can be reached at my number. That's a pretty short and sweet one there. Here's a cliffhanger one. These you've got to be careful with, but man, I have heard some powerful ones. This was a sample. There's a little more detail, but I wanted to keep it generic for our discussion. John, I saw on your website X and Y problems. Would like to discuss it. Gabe with InsideSales.com, I can be reached at this number, and you repeat that number twice. Got to be careful with cliffhangers, especially when you highlight an issue or a problem. And again, this is authentic. This needs to be real. I don't want lies in here, but you better be ready to answer it. I'm thinking one client we did with this, they had crazy callback rates on this voice message, but boy, the callbacks were like they need to know what problem it was because they wanted to solve it. So those are a couple examples, and then the idea again is to roll those examples into your cadence strategy. So let's say I'm again going to focus on my SDR Relational Outbound. I'm going to use a research as my number one, pain elimination is my number two, and then maybe humor, funny is my number three. Now, you'll see 3 across the board. At the labs here at InsideSales.com, 3 seems to be the magic number. I'm kicking myself that I didn't put that study in there. It's not an external study. It was internal on our own people. But 3 was the magic number on voicemail, and you'll see kind of as I wrap into cadence, we've got 6 to 10 phone calls, we've got 3 voicemails, and we're going to kind of bring in email and social here in just a minute. Good. Let's go. Obviously our technology, InsideSales.com technology, very appropriate for creating that automated voicemail. Record it, get a great script, no ums and ahs, and be able to drop that efficiently. That's part of the InsideSales.com package. Check it out if you've not heard about it. Great. Next, let's go email, and then I promise we'll wrap this all up kind of here into cadence. But I want to get to some Q&A. So go ahead and answer this poll question. I want to hear about your emails. Where are you on emails in that cadence? Let's see some of these Q&As. Rod, so while you're answering that, so on average, we make 100 calls, 93% are not answered or go to voicemail. So Rod, excuse me, not Rob. Typical contact rate is looking at between 5 and 10%, depending on which study. A lot of them hovering around 7.88%. So your contact rate is a little low, not terrible though. We make 2 appointments and have 5 rejections. Is that customary in today's environment? Rod, let's shoot me a note or grab me on LinkedIn after, and let's dive into that because there's some pretty good funnel metrics that you can follow. Alex is saying 1 voicemail per dial as often as possible. So the question around should you always leave a voicemail with a phone call? No, you should not. You got to see if you can mix and match that and use maybe a ghost call, I think as some people are calling it. Isn't personalize your message and using automation a conflicting advice? Oof, Ryan's hitting me on the hard one. Ryan, it's a good question. Typically what I like to do is mix and match automation with personalization. So let's say you're going to leave a 3 voicemail strategy. Maybe on the first one, you really personalize it and use the guy's name 2 times. On the second one, you use automation and go with something that's a little more, it's not generic. I still think you can personalize it, but you don't use their name, but you personalize it to their pain or to their company. So I don't see it being in conflict. I like to use both of them, and then proof's in the pudding. Got to see kind of what ends up there. Yeah, so Chris, I gave you a couple voicemail samples. You maybe wrote that after that I may use. I really like the cliffhanger. I really like the value, kind of the value projection or the value certification type of concept. Sorry, guys, I can only answer 2. Let's jump back in and see the poll results on emails. A little more emails. I'm not too surprised in that. So certainly in the 3 to 5, but a lot of you in that 6 to 9 range. Let's go into email. Let's go a little bit deeper here. So according to this study, you've got 205 billion emails sent each day. That's a number. That's a pretty big number. I mentioned this earlier. Average office worker receives 121 emails each day. I'd like to write them. That seems a little heavy. I don't think I get 120. There's days I may hit 100, but that's pretty hit. But I guess if you take all of them in aggregate, that may be true. Let's talk about quickly just how to build a really tight kind of program here, or email. 5 steps to structure a successful email. Got to have good subjects. Need to be short, to the point, without sounding too used car salesman. Opening, second point, needs to be personalized. Ryan, you mentioned that, and focused on the prospect. This is not about you. This is about them. In the body, we really want to start talking about connecting our value to the prospect in that relevant and personalized manner. As you move towards closing, want to be strong, got to get in that call to action, make it clear. Don't be soft. Don't be over aggressive. I'm having a hard time finding that in the closing and the call to action. I'm hearing from qualitative feedback. I'm always out on the road and asking people, the assumptive close, like the cockiness of sales reps can come off pretty annoying. So, hey, I've got time at this time, make it happen. Let's make it happen, or you make it happen. There's a balance between too strong and too weak. The weak side being, hey, maybe you could meet at this potential time. So finding that balance of too cocky and too weak, I've been trying to play around and test some stuff here in our labs. Certainly will continue to communicate as I find out great info on that. And then signature, probably the key takeaway here is just don't let it distract. 50 different things in your email signature is probably not necessary. I've included a couple do's and don'ts on this. Some of this is hard to get good data on. Some of it's just battle-tested wounds. Subject lines, I've heard, anything more than 3 words. I like the concept of thinking about Twitter. I don't like spam words, final specials, although I've heard free works pretty well. Opening, I'm going to talk about some best practice strategies there. But again, going straight with almost like a voicemail. Hi, my name is, and I'm from company. I don't think you have a lot of time, so I'd try to jump right into your value and then kind of bring in who you are a little bit later. Bodies, I like questions. I don't like generic value statements. Closing, I like that kind of clear call to action, very direct. Signatures, I'm a big proponent of a picture. In the inside sales world in particular, you've got to bridge that gap and see if you can't mimic the face-to-face interaction. I'm not a huge believer in kind of cheesy quotes, and even email. They have your email. I don't know if you need to include that in your signature. Top email tips. We're still finding mostly early morning and late afternoon. Love people who are A/B testing different templates. Like to include typically a link or an attachment. Shorter the better. Seeing different things here. Been testing a couple things. Really anything over just be cautious on the length. I'm still trying to find what optimal length is, so I won't spurt it out at the moment. You got some different industry stuff out there. Pictures and GIFs, use them sparingly. We're typically finding that 3 to 6 email range, again, depending on your role, and then spacing follows such. Again, kind of that 1 to 3 day or 3 to 10, depending on your persona. We'll go into a couple email strategies. Again, I think you want to define your strategies and then be able to throw them into your cadence. So let's, for example, say competition. I've pulled this one from HubSpot. I think it's a decent example of a quote-unquote competition email. I think you want to try to determine these and get these down, then put them in your cadence. So they've got subject line 10x, traction in 10 minutes. I have an idea I can explain in 10 minutes that can get company name, its next 100 best customers. I recently used that idea to help a competitor almost triple their monthly run rate. So we bring that competition in there. Let's schedule a quick 10-minute call so I can share the idea when works best for you. Like that kind of balance, not super cocky call to action, not really weak, using competition. So again, the reason I'm showing you these email strategies, I want people to get organized. I want to think of, hey, here's our 10 categories. Let's get a couple templates in place, and then let's test those templates. I just feel oftentimes people are just randomly creating emails. Let's bucket them. Are you using the competition play, the referral play, the research, the pain, the case study? It gives you a way to start to get organized. And God, when it comes to emails and voicemails, frankly, got to get there. Now, again, taking these strategies, putting it into play. I've just went with the 3 or 4 here by persona. You can see how we're building up now. I've got my phone calls determined. I've got my voicemails. I've got my email. Now I'm ready to go ahead and put them together. Now, again, word for thought here, the Inside Sales.com vision tool, the email tool. great for creating templates, great for using in your cadence strategy, can create drip campaigns, can test your kind of A/B approach. Great tool to be used in cadence strategies. Okay, woo! We got it. We finally got there. We're to a place where we can finally get into the cadence. Hopefully too many people haven't dropped off. I got a lot of questions, you guys. We'll see if we can't get to some of those at the end. Mike, if you can highlight some of those, it would be good. I know it looks like we've got about 25 questions, 30 questions. He's saying we'll get to them in just a minute. Let's bring this together, cadence. So, okay, 3 options for cadence that I think you need to be thinking about, and I'm recognizing it by persona. So you'll see over on the right-hand side, the productivity versus autonomy graph. Guys, I don't mean to make this complicated, but I think this is the right way to do it. I've been using it successfully for years now, and I think a lot of people can grasp it. So you notice the personas are on there. On the vertical curve, you've got the autonomy. On the horizontal, you've got productivity. Where do you want your reps to be, or where do you as a rep want to be? You've got a few different options here. So I'm going to start in the bottom right-hand side. If I'm an SDR and I'm high volume, or if I'm an AE and I'm extremely high volume, you probably want to go with what we call an automated system defined. That's predefined time between activities, where the system actually defines it for you and you just follow it as necessary. Now, these are people, I think it was Rod, who said they're making 100 phone calls. Rod, this is probably, if you're trailing in the 100+ phone calls, you probably want to eliminate a lot of the guesswork and get your people on a system-defined cadence. Now, the middle ground is that structured user-defined, where you give reps some autonomy, but you also kind of maintain that productivity. So, for example, you would kind of set a basic cadence out and then let users define and say, okay, once they've made a phone call, for example, they can choose that the next activity comes, let's say 3 or 5 or 7 days out, and they have those 3 options, but it allows you as potentially a manager and ops person a little bit more control. Again, not right or wrong, it just depends on kind of the persona, and typically if you're in kind of that SDR low volume, this is not a bad kind of moment to place to jump into. Lastly is this user defined. This is probably the most utilized in the market. I don't know, I don't think that's right for everybody, I guess would be my comment. That's going to be very autonomous and potentially a little less productive. That's where the user either manually, using tasks in CRM, or a system like our product, we're coming out with a product called Playbooks that allows to do this very effectively, but the user just defines it. The user says, hey, this is what I want to do with these types of leads. I want to run through this type of touch cadence, and that's completely in the user control. So there's a balance based on the persona that I typically recommend people to move towards. Definitely number 3 is probably the most utilized, but it's not always the right one. I'm a big fan of that productivity and autonomy curve. Now, for my foundational cadence, and because of timing, I cut out some of the studies on the social, but I always label my cadences as such here. You'll see 6-3-3-3 or 4-3-3-3, something like that, and I always go from aggressive to passive. So you're going to see here 6 phone calls, 3 voicemail, 3 email, 3 social. I call this, or we call this at InsideSales.com, the foundational cadence. It's the one we've got the most research on, and it provides the baseline of where we go. And then based on the persona and how aggressive or passive they want to be, we then alter the foundational cadence in order to get to an optimal place by market, by company, etc. But we start with this kind of 6-3-3 concept. And I'd recommend it for you. It's a great place to start. Now let's get into a couple example cadences based on personas and attributes and then also type. Now, I don't have your market. I don't have if you're B2B or B2C, if you're going after this or that. So again, this is a great way to find some common principles that we can start to standardize on, and then you can move and tailor it even more. So let's break this one down here on the left. You can see I'm using a structure user defined. That's kind of the concept I'm going with. And then I've named it a 6-3-4-3. That's going to be 6 phone calls, 3 voicemails, 4 emails, 3 social touches. And I've got a sales development rep who's relational, more strategic. And they're focusing on outbound, so lists that we've purchased potentially. Now, I've also labeled this as aggressive or passive. This is an aggressive cadence for this type of persona, but let's go through it. Notice the 30 days. You're going to see me either over about a 2-week, 10-day kind of business day period or over a 30-day period. So for this one, relational, I'm going over 30 days. Day 1, I've got email 1. I start with an email. I get call 1 and voicemail 1. Again, that's being a little more aggressive. Day 4, 3 days later, I'm going to bring in social, go call 2, no voicemail. Day 3, I'm going to lead with an email because it's relational. Most relational reps go a little more heavy on the email, at least from a leading standpoint. You get call 3, voicemail 2. Then I jump to day 10. So I'm keeping that kind of 3 days between the first few touches. And again, this is aggressive. I get my social touch 2, call 4, email 3. Then I branch that out and jump my time between activities to 10 days. So I've gone from 3, 3, 3, and then I hit 10 and 10 there to get me to day 20 and day 30. And I wrap up with a call 6, a voicemail 3, and an email 4. Now, some of you, I've seen some questions that say, you know, why so many phone calls? Again, this is aggressive. If I went passive, I'd probably go more with email and some of the more social. But again, I'm finding that balance between what we call that foundational cadence to see what's right for you and your market, thinking about the persona. Good. So that's more of a kind of relational one. Again, I've got, who is that? That's Daisy. Daisy saying, what is SM? Good question. SM is social media touch. That's going to be a LinkedIn message, a like, a Twitter touch, a reply, some sort of social media engagement. So you've got call, EM is email, VM is voicemail, and then SM is social media. Thanks, Daisy, for throwing that out. Now, let's look at something, let's look at a different one. I want to go through just a couple of these. Sales development, transactional, but focusing on inbound leads, also going aggressive. Now, a lot of people are going to say, Dave, that's too much. But all my data, you guys, coming out of the labs is saying speed to lead is killer. Speed to lead. I don't care what study you look at. You look at the InsideSales.com 5-minute study. You look at some of the others. Nothing, hour on average, anything over 24 hours is terrible, and your contact rates by day go down drastically. And so I've designed a pretty aggressive cadence. I've had a lot of my internal teams run this and test it out. I'm using an automated system defined, so not a lot of autonomy. They are following the cadence that I know to be best practice. I'm not letting these reps do whatever they want, whenever they want, because of the types of leads and types of personas we're dealing with. So notice I go heavy on day 1, day 2, and day 3. Boom, boom, and boom. They came to me. I'm going 3 phone calls in day 1, 2 phone calls on day 2, and then still 2 phone calls on day 3. So you've got a 10 phone call, 4 voicemail, 4 email, and then no social touches here. This is just me being really aggressive. I don't want these people messing around on LinkedIn and getting into other switching screens. No. They're making 100+ phone calls. These guys are really killing it. Let's just let them do what they do best. If they don't get a hold of these people and we flip them over to another team, they can use social. So that's, again, real aggressive. I'm seeing some people give me some ums and some ahs about that. Let's dive into one that's then kind of passive here. I did put one passive, didn't I? Yes. So this one would be a little more passive. This is an account executive who's relational, so I'm thinking strategic. We're not probably selling Boeing jets, but we're selling something that's maybe ACV of maybe, quarter million, 100,000 or something around that. Focusing again on outbound new business and being a little more passive. It's not a negative. It's just a strategy we feel comfortable with. Notice it's right around that 30-day period, and you're going to see between that kind of 1 to 10-day time between activities. So day 1, I just go with an email. Truthfully, this is more where I feel like the market is. I'm not in love with these. because I just feel I'm just an aggressive person. It's just the way I do things. But I know it's been successful in different areas, and so I can't knock it. Email day 1, day 6, 5 days later. Oh, that still kind of hurts, but I get it. You start with social. Then you maybe bring in a phone call and a voicemail. 5 days later, you go another social, another email. Another 5 days later, bring in a phone call too. Then you jump 10 days and then 10 days and kind of mix and match your social, email, and phone call. I'm a big believer, and I'll talk about that in just a minute, to end aggressively. So I do typically end with kind of the full patch, the phone, the email, and the voicemail, and kind of give them my last hurrah before I kill this and let it kind of recycle in whatever time frame you've defined at. So I wanted to give you a couple. I've actually designed 21 optimal cadences by persona. Man, we should have given that as a download or something. If you want that, you should go ahead and hit me up on LinkedIn or Twitter. But let's go ahead and bring this kind of to the end. Wrapping this up, some of the best practice cadence principles. Like I said, I like to end aggressively. Transactional should typically be around 2 weeks. That's that high volume persona. That's typically 10 business days or 14 kind of just regular days. Relational, I typically like to build more around a 30-day cadence. Relational is going to be a little more heavy on probably email and social. Social messages come in more in relational roles. That foundation, 6333. Phone calls. I'm going aggressive to passive there. 6 phone calls, 3 voicemail, 3 email, 3 social. I like to keep it simple on the intervals. Don't go call day 1 phone call, day 2 phone call, day 5, day 6, day 15, day 72. Get something that's a little more consistent. I like 2 to 3 intervals. So for example, 3 days between activities and then I jump to 10, or 3 days and then I jump to 5, or 1 day between activities and then I jump to 3. Get something that's a little more consistent. The spacing we talked about, 1 to 3 day spacing, that's more going to be on transactional. You're going to go 3 to 10, more on the relational side of things. Those are actually pretty decent principles and some decent tried and true ones. I'm reading the list and thinking, hey, that's not too bad. I think that's pretty good. Okay. Lastly, you guys, how do you make sure you get people to adhere to a cadence? Number 1 is reporting. That's something you just got to build some reports around. What's the average touch per lead? If you're not running some of those reports, I should be able to come into your business and say, what is the average call to convert? Are you typically getting, 3 calls, 4 calls, 5 calls? How many touches are you getting per lead? But besides that, I've seen some fun things out in the market. Certainly, your system could tell you that in our product coming out here soon, playbooks. You can see the group and see where they are in the cadence. You could print out kind of an optimal cadence so that people can follow along and remember what they want to do. Get some counterfills in your CRM so they can see it on the record, or the activity history. Have your reps reference that to be able to more effectively adhere to their cadence, or you can do some real fun things. I've seen some funky custom code that people have put into their CRM to make sure people know where they are and what's next in their kind of cadence strategy. So, woo! I think that kind of brings us to a close. We've got too many questions. We'll just have to see how many we can get through them. But again, it's Gabe Larson. If you don't connect with me on LinkedIn or on Twitter, I'll be offended. If you don't at least listen in briefly to our Sales Acceleration podcast, you can see the address here. Great speakers talking real people, real problems, real solutions. Join me every Monday and Thursday. We push out an episode. It's been fun. You should join me if you can. Let's go to some of the questions. Lauren, you're fast. You got me on Twitter already. That's what I'm talking about. I should see about, what do we have, a couple hundred on here at least. We should get some other people adding me here pretty fast. Okay. Whew. Now, I went through that fast. That was a lot of content. Mike, what do we got? Is Lauren right there? Lauren from Paradigm Learning. That's not Paradigm Life. What are your thoughts on putting prospect's name in the subject line? I actually am a big proponent of that. The problem is it's starting to be overused, starting to be used a lot. It's becoming less of a differentiator. Again, the key is zig when others zag. And so if you can't, there we go. We're getting some people. Selena, thanks for adding me on Twitter. Steve, thanks for adding me on Twitter. It's proofs in the pudding. A/B test it. But it was a good strategy, but it is becoming something that's being used. It's almost like the humor thing. I debated this on our podcast just the other day, and humor, that was so unique, I think, for a little while there, but everybody's doing it. I'm getting random humor emails all the time, and it's starting to get a little bit old, so got to be always kind of thinking of the new stuff. What else we got here, Mike? Let's see. Selena, yeah, looks like you added me on Twitter. John, thanks for adding me. How soon after an inbound call should we contact them with the cadence? Oh, my goodness, Selena, you set me up for a good one there. You're talking to Mr. Aggressive. I'm all about ASAP. So an inbound lead comes in, you get on that thing as fast as you can. You call it within seconds or minutes. I've done that 100,000 times. I know there's somebody out there shaking your head. Oh, that's NSA. That's scary. It scares people. It's hustle. And I buy from sales reps who hustle, and I expect the same from my sales reps. Now, there are a couple asterisks on that. If we get 25,000 inbound leads a month. You can't respond to all of those in 5 seconds. You got to pick and choose. You want to follow up on your best leads. Worked with a lot of clients who you can't respond to everything. You respond to your best leads first. Thank you, Selena. I've got to get off my soapbox there for a minute. Take a deep breath. It's okay. Karen, is there someplace we can find examples for each email? I didn't include that. Karen, hit me up on LinkedIn or on Twitter, and I can send you some of my examples. Dawn, do we have a 5 to 7-step email phone cadence that has been working great for your company and your reps? Well, by persona, again, we use the foundational 6333. But if you look at the example that I put on there for high volume sales development reps that are focused on inbound leads, that's the one we had been using. We just got a great new sales leader named Justin Hyatt who's come over from HubSpot to run kind of our sales development team. But that 10 4 voicemails, 4 emails, 0 social, that's what we've been using internally for a while. Pretty darn effective. Extremely aggressive there, Don. Connor, what do you consider a successful open reply rate for emails? Oh, my. Typical industry is still sitting at 1%. I know great people who are getting into the teens. That's where I consider it to be pretty darn effective once you hit the teens. Ronald, Mike, I don't know if I can get through all these questions. My goodness. Ronald, do you recommend delivery receipt and or a read receipt on an email? Thank you, Ronald. Great question. Heck no. If you ask me to do a read receipt on an email, I'm going to punch you in the gut because the principle's spot on. But I want read receipts on steroids, and that's what you're going to get from a product like Vision. That's going to give you read receipts without them knowing them, throw a little pixel in their email, and it's going to give you engagement statistics like what they're downloading, what they're doing, did they open it, and you'll be able to get some of the statistics that Don's looking for. So love engagement stats, but if you do read receipts, you're going to get a punch in the teeth. I still get them once in a while, and then usually I just laugh. We've moved beyond read receipts. Now, you mentioned that you leave just enough info on your voicemail. What do you suggest? This is very subjective depending on the industry. This is Malone. You and I could debate this offline if you want to. Grab me on LinkedIn. We could kind of talk about it. I gave one example. I call it cliffhangers. This is a little bit hairy of a situation, but it's a very effective one. So the example I gave was where a company did due diligence. They reviewed a company's website. They were actually looking at compliance statements online. They went and reviewed their compliance statement, and then they called and left a voicemail that was to the CFO that said, hey, I just reviewed your compliance statement. Would like to discuss it with you, Gabe with XYZ Company. It was very true. They found a problem in it. They were not lying. They left just enough info to get them to call back, and they had callback rates. I mean, Ken here, what was it? I think I think it was like in the 50%. Been a little while. Need to go back and look at it, but it was so powerful. Left a strong impression in my mind. I've done other things similar, so that's kind of the concept, Malone, that I'm talking about here. Ron Wittenberg here. On average, we experience the following stats on calls. Ron, I'm missing the rest of the question. Maybe see if you can get me the rest of it. Mike, I'd love to see vertical specific data in this study example. I see fin services. They are never at their phones at 8 a.m. That's true. We actually found those optimal call times for, we called into, what was it? It was medical, like dental offices and medical. They did a lot better at what the general study said was its worst times. They were best in kind of the noon hour. So you're right, Mike. It's always hard to do a webinar. You know, we got 700 people, I think, on this. So many industries, we kept it generic, but can't argue with your point there. When someone downloads, Mike's got double whammy here. When someone downloads our content, I have a drip or nurture email that comes from marketing. But at the same time, I have SDR's attack for appointment setting with 7 touches in their cadence. Is that confusing to a prospect? You know, I'm a little bit torn on this one. I hate generic. We're getting to a place where personalization is always trumping automation. So I'm open to your auto response email, your first auto response, if your reps aren't getting to it very fast. If they are getting it to it very fast, then I would prefer that your nurture emails work very much in conjunction with your sales development reps. I don't like the double whammy. So for example, let me see if I can just give you a quick example here. So no immediate response email goes back that says, thank you, I'm a nobody, I'm generic. Your sales development calls them fairly quickly and then drops a personalized message and then puts them in a new lead status that triggers a specific email from your nurture campaign to be sent someday later with a specific offer. Then 2 days later, your sales development rep does another phone call with another email, and you approach it like that. See if you can't merge the two together, because I'm not a big believer in random drip campaigns that kind of mess people's messaging up. Good. Bill, oh man, I'm 50 questions behind here, and we've got about a minute. Bill, I totally buy that lead response is important, but what if 60% of your inbound trial setup leads are SQLs? How do reps qualify leads quickly? Yeah, so that's kind of what I was hitting at the end there, Bill. If you're getting, like us, thousands of emails, you're probably not going to get to all of them, especially if these are really qualified. You've got to find a way. You've got to find a way to prioritize. So you want to have your current team prioritize. You want to have a killer drip campaign to see if you can't get other people who maybe aren't in the SQL to get there. And then you've got to get your qualification. You say, how do you get your reps to qualify leads quickly? Again, if you're in a high volume transactional world, this is going to sound bad to those relational people out there, but you've got 4 questions. You've got your ANIM questions, your authority, need, urgency, and money. Get my questions out, get them down, and then get that person off. You shouldn't, in a transactional model, be on the phone for more than, God, what was it? It was about 10 to 15 minutes, right in that 12 range. If you're relational, you got a little bit more time, but that's typically about 4 questions. So that's how you tighten it. You standardize and systematize your qualification process. So Yogesh hit text messages. Guys, we're releasing a communication study. Text messages coming on super fast. Even in prospecting, text messages is starting to play a bigger role. I've not incorporated it too many times because you just have a little bit of a gray line there, Yogesh. For follow-up, it's a no-brainer. If you're not using text for your sales development team as text reminders and a way to get direct dial phone numbers, you're missing the ball. But using it right in a cadence strategy is that's even beyond my aggression. I love to use it in referral cadences. That's something I'm open to use, but you got to be very careful when you use it. So, guys, it's 1 o'clock. I unfortunately have an important meeting I got to jump on to. Mike, fantastic webinar. Well, I don't know if it was fantastic. I'd be complimenting myself. Tons of questions, you guys. Please continue the conversation on LinkedIn. I wanted to get into the nitty-gritty and get into the detail rather than giving you the fluff. Looks like some of you thought I did that. Connect with me, argue with me, catch me on social. Have a fantastic day. I'm going to drop you from there. Bye-bye.